Third pathway we'll consider is the spinothalamic pathway. It's a sensory pathway. Spinothalamic pathway carries out the perception and localization of pain and temperature and ends up located at the postcentral gyrus. In a neuro exam, testing for pain and temperature is well done with a cold object. You don't need something pointy because they correspond so closely in assessing loss due to either peripheral nerve lesions or central nervous system. The sensitivity and spatial resolution for pain and temperature makes this pathway a very good one for assessing dermatome mapping. The central and peripheral processes are a mix of unmyelinated and small myelinated axons as opposed to the large myelinated axons of the dorsal column lemniscal pathway. The receptors in this system are mainly free nerve endings. The lateral spinothalamic pathway is a three-neuron chain, and central fibers enter the dorsal root ganglia at the spinal cord, and then they often branch into an intersegmental tract, the tract of Lissauer, to synapse in the dorsal horn across a couple of segments. The cells of the second order neuron send their axons across to the other side near the level that they come in, within a segment or two, and then ascend in the anterolateral portion of the cord in the lateral spinothalamic tract. And the tract stays in that anterolateral position all the way up through the spinal cord, up through the brainstem, and then finally synapses in the thalamus, in the ventral posterior lateral nucleus, on the third order neuron. The third order neuron travels up to the postcentral gyrus of the primary somatosensory cortex, along with the spinothalamic neurons from the medial lemniscus. Fibers of the second order neuron that do decussate in the spinal cord at the anterior white commissure. We see them coming in after synapsing in the dorsal horn, coming across the anterior white commissure, and they'll then ascend in the spinothalamic tract, here, the lateral spinothalamic tract. We see here that as neurons first come into the spinal cord, they often travel for one or two segments up or down the spinal cord in Lissauer's tract before they synapse in the dorsal horn. Some of the structures are described that they synapse in the dorsal horn at the substantia gelatinosa and the nucleus proprius, various levels within the dorsal horn for interaction, for reflexes and other activities that will interact with, as we've learned, alteration of pain pathways. These Lissauer's tract facilitates the interaction across many segments of pain reflexes or withdrawal reflexes. The blood supply we should recognize in the anterolateral pathway in the spinal cord is provided by the anterior spinal artery. So Lissauer's the lateral spinothalamic tract, as well as the corticospinal tract, is fed by the anterior spinal artery at the spinal cord level. And once you get into the brainstem in the medulla, we see that posterior inferior cerebellar artery provides supply to the spinothalamic tract. And as we get into the thalamus, into the pons, we see that AICA, the anterior inferior cerebellar artery, provides blood supply to the spinothalamic tract. This is different from the medial lemniscus, which is still pretty medial. spinal tract, lateral spinothalamic tract seen here through all of the brainstem levels will follow its position, but notice that it stays lateral throughout its ascent through the brainstem. We see here the initial incoming sensory fiber synapsing in the dorsal horn, traveling over to the other side within a segment or two, and then staying in a lateral position all the way up through spinal cord and brainstem to the thalamus. At the thalamus, it travels through the internal capsule up to the postcentral gyrus, areas 3-1. We see here that transition at the spinal cord level of sensory fibers coming in, being involved in withdrawal reflexes at this level and at nearby segments, and then second order cell traveling through the anterior white commissure to the opposite side in the lateral spinal thalamic pathway, the anterolateral position, and then it stays far lateral. As we move up to the spinomedullary junction, it continues its travel on the lateral position. As we move up to the medial lemniscus, we see that it's sitting just above the olive in a lateral position when we're looking at this medulla. And as we move up, we see how far away it is from the dorsal column lemniscal, medial lemniscus, and the pyramids. And as a result, insults to the lateral pathway may not have any influence on medial lemniscus and pyramid. As we move up to the pons, we see that it stays in this lateral position as the medial lemniscus is moving a little more laterally, so that the leg is starting to approach the spinal thalamic pathway laterally. As we move a little bit higher into the midbrain, we see the spinal thalamic pathway still in a lateral position, and now the medial lemniscus has moved out laterally towards. As we go higher in the midbrain, we see that it's still in the lateral position. And then as we approach the thalamus, we see that synapses in the thalamus and those fibers that are going, carrying information from the leg and the arm, travel to the medial surface of the paracentral lobule and the superior surface of the postcentral gyrus. And fibers for the head travel more laterally to the postcentral gyrus. Damage to the lateral spinothalamic tract in the brainstem or above, as with all the other fibers, tracts that we've talked about, corticospinal and medial lemniscus, produce contralateral signs on the body, and that is a loss of pain and temperature sensation. So damage in the brainstem or in the cortex produces contralateral effects for this pathway, as well as for the corticospinal pathway and the dorsal column lemniscal pathway. But lesions in the spinal cord produce contralateral pain and temperature loss below the lesion. It's an important difference for this pathway compared to the other pathways. The sensory level produced by this lesion also differs, and that is it's in the contralateral side, and the sensory loss may start 1 or 2 segments below the location of the lesion because of Lissauer's tract. And we see those findings summarized here, and that is with lesions in both the brain, cerebral cortex, thalamus, as well as the brainstem, all the way down through the medulla, as well as in the spinal cord, produce contralateral loss of pain and temperature until you get down near the level of the insult to the spinal cord, at which point you find a loss on the ipsilateral side within 1 or 2 segments of the site of the damage. That effect of Lissauer's tract is shown here, and that is if you have damage at T8, in fact, some of the fibers that traveled across the midline from T10 and T12, they might be blocked. So you would not be able to feel. With a lesion at T8, you might not be able to feel any pain and temperature at T10 and below. But fibers that are coming in at T9 may come in, on the opposite side, may come in, and then they may travel in Lissauer's tract for 1 or 2 segments. So they're able to get up and cross above this lesion, so that sensation may be preserved even at the very same level the fibers came in on the opposite side, or at one level lower. So there may be a little bit of discrepancy of the location of the lesion and the level at which you have a loss of pain and temperature. Thank you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me.